have worked with rising executives who are trying to figure out the formula. Like they've got their own little chemistry set, and they think that there's this like particular potion that makes an executive, and they're trying to figure out what it is. Like, what do I need to have to be that person? And a lot of times it's really interesting to hear them achieve that status, realizing there was no secret necessarily, and that they are still as smart as anyone in the room, as capable as anyone in the room.
Hi, in today's episode, I'm going to be talking with Rob Hatch. Rob is an author and an executive coach, and we'll be talking about psychology of leadership, as well as how we really learn better from success than we do from failure. Rob, welcome.
And thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's great to see you. It's been a little while.
It has definitely been a while, but
yeah,
I'm really glad to see you and be here. So thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. I read your newsletters, maybe not religiously, but I do read them. And I love the references that you have about fly fishing. It makes me miss fly fishing because I know that's something that we had talked about back in the day. And I'm envious of you getting out into the wild and doing that. I've got to keep telling myself, I got to get out and do that again.
You know, getting the wild is sometimes like the river that's 3 minutes from my house, which is not really wild, and sometimes I catch the best fish right there. So it is.
Yeah, we live here in Seattle, and we think, yeah, I mean, we got it pretty good because we have the mountains here. We have, of course, the Puget Sound and whatever, all this great nature around us. So, and you're on the other side. You're up in Maine, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we are just finally getting some nice weather here. Well, we've had a very long, wet, cold spring so far. So.
Is that better for fishing or?
I honestly, it's, you can find it either way, as long as it's not too hot, in the middle of summer. That's sort of when things slow down, but like on either side, as long as the water's cool, there's fishing to be had. And so,
yeah. I love it. I want to get out again. Okay.
We'll make that a priority by the
yes. Or I can come to Maine and then
we can go.
Yeah. Let's do that. Yeah. So yeah, thank you so much for joining me on Data and Confused. For our audience here, could you please tell us who is Rob Hatch and what does he do?
Oh my. Well, so I am an author and an executive coach is the easiest way to describe it. I've written 2 books. One is called Attention, the Power of Simple Decisions in the Distracted World. And the other is called Success Frames. And that in Success Frames, I kind of take the notion that we learn from our failure and flip it on its head and talk about how we actually learn better. We learn more from our successes than we do our failures. They just have so much more to talk about, to tell us, basically. And then I, do a lot of coaching. I coach a lot of business owners. I coach executives, rising executives who are in transition at some point in their career or in their business. And that's honestly one of my favorite things to do, is just to help people think through big decisions, challenges in their work, and really just kind of restore that sort of confidence in their own decision making.
So what does that look like to help someone? And do they typically bring you in when it's like you're called in as sort of a firefighter? There's a problem and it's just like, all right, I need help now. We have to do something. Or, or is it more just wanting to be a better leader?
It's leans more towards the wanting to be a better leader, but there is something that's at work, something that feels a little off, right? Most of my clients are just feeling either overwhelmed by where they're directing their time and how they're managing their business, or how the things that are hitting them each day, the decisions that they're faced with, something feels out of alignment. And so we will talk usually over the period of about 6 months or more, just kind of working through their specific situation. One of my favorite things to do is just kind of dive in immediately, sometimes even on a very first call before we even are officially working together. I just want to know what's going on and dig into the challenge that they're facing. What oftentimes what they think they're coming in needing is very different than what they end up needing or taking away. But we uncovered that pretty quickly, and just get to work. And it's a lot of just conversation. And I find that executives, business owners, as you know, like, it's a very lonely role to run your own business as an entrepreneur. You have some good people around you, but there is this sense of wanting to protect them from some of the tougher things that plague you, whether that, kind of sometimes that's an ego thing. Sometimes that's just a genuine, I want to protect them from my worries. So to have kind of third party or another person that you can really just lay things out and sort of think through those challenges or the situation. We don't give ourselves a lot of time to step back and reflect, and to be able to do it with someone else is usually it's really powerful for me. I've worked with a coach for many years as well, and I just find that process of being able to think outside of the context of my work really helpful.
So you use the word coach, and I love that. And I think also, I think I've seen people maybe characterize it in different ways. And so I was wondering if you could explain maybe the difference in your mind between these. So sometimes I'll see someone come in and they'll say they're a consultant or a mentor. So like, what's the difference? Is there a difference between a mentor, a coach, and a consultant? And how do you work with your clients? And is there a role maybe to be a mentor sometimes more than a coach, or maybe more of a consultant type thing?
I personally, the way that I approach coaching is it kind of blends all of the things that we think about when we think about each of the roles that you named. Like, there's this mentorship, probably to a lesser extent, but consultant, sometimes there's something very specific going on in the business, and you have to offer some advisory support around what you might consider and what what are the specific things that you should think about when making these decisions. As a coach, I'm more encouraging reflection, conversation, asking more probing questions, and trying to sort of elicit discovery, basically. So, that people often have a lot of the answers. They just haven't been able to name them, articulate them really well, and then sort of, okay, so if that's the thing, then now what do I need to do? And then we think about, what information you might need to gather to make a more confident decision here. But it's about kind of teasing out some of those things first as a coach. The consultant ends up being more advisory, which definitely comes into play at times.
So, you mentioned earlier about failure and the relationship to failure, and, as a small business leader, an entrepreneur, we hear the statistics, right? It's like 90% or more of small businesses fail in the first 3 years. Is there a way that we can, sort of, I don't know, beat the odds, game the system? Is having a coach, or having a good framework or methodology for going about how you're doing things, can that help? How much can that help better your odds in whatever it is that you're doing?
I'd hate to throw numbers out there.
Yeah,
I
of
think
course.
I do think it improves the odds, whether it's a coach or, there are startup incubators that people can get support and advice from, sometimes people who have been in the industry, which is really helpful. I have a friend who is doing commercial food production, just stepping into that world and understanding how distribution works and working with brokers. And so he has been paired with some really, incredible folks who have helped him sort of think through and narrow down what he should focus on. And that part right there, that narrowing down, I think is the biggest part of gaming the system.
The
It
focus.
is not just focus, but also when you start a business, you're excited. You want to take on the world. You've got this big idea, and you can kind of move. You can move too fast without testing those ideas to see if they work. or not. And, you know, I have a friend who runs a company. His name is John Grossman. He runs a company called the Holyoke Hummus Company. And he started out selling falafel sandwiches from a folding table at some volleyball courts in, in his area of the world.
As
To
one does.
yeah,
Yeah.
just like so
Yeah.
he originally like used to bring them as a when you go to a friend's house and you're
Sure.
asking something, he'd bring those
Yeah.
sandwiches, and everyone said, wow, you should sell
Yeah.
these.
It's
And
the
so he
falafel
tested the
guy. Yeah.
idea, and he brought a cooler full of these warm falafel sandwiches he had pre-made, and he sold them for $7. And then he moved from doing that several times to getting a food cart. And then the food cart became a food truck, and the food truck became a restaurant for a while. COVID kind of messed with that, but like very small, deliberate steps to test out an idea to see what the response is. And I think, sometimes it's okay if it only ends up being the food cart. Sometimes it's okay if it only ends up being the truck. You don't have to get to the restaurant. That doesn't always have to be the bigger goal. Now his hummus has become so popular that is what he's working on, um, you know, getting into stores right now. And he's, been slowly, methodically growing that part of the business, is his commercial food production for the for his hummus.
Yeah. And I think, that's a great story. And I love it because it was something that, he was good at, came from his background, right? And he, leaned into that and just, but still at the core of its business, it was like deeply meaningful to him.
Yeah. And he built on what worked, which gets to the question about the failure thing. It's sort of, it's not that we don't learn from failures. It's that the detail behind them, I think, is what we elevate too much. So it's sort of if you failed, you're one, well, I don't want to do that again. So it's just a matter of like, don't do that. When you have success, there's something to dig into to go like, how did I do that? How did I make that work? Did I prepare a certain way? Did I, what was my attitude, or what signage did I have? Like just kind of deep dive into all the different little nuances of the decisions that you made to get to that point. It's so much more rich. And if you can start to replicate that, to kind of, it can become this, personal framework that you go to where you're like, hey, I've done this before. I just have to think about it a little, maybe I apply it to a new context, but I can draw on that and replicate some of those things for a new challenge.
Yeah. As a business leader too, I think I typically come at those things from kind of a scientific mindset. I'm going to try this. I'm going to try that. I'm going to figure out what works. And when I initially got your book and I was reading through it, I was looking at it from that approach. And one of the things you talked about there, you just mentioned frameworks and frameworks versus formulas. And it struck me at some point reading the book, it's like, this is more of an art than it is a science.
Yeah, I would agree. And the nuance that's involved in the, say, generalization and recontextualization of the framework, right? So I will look at people who are facing a new challenge, and I might ask them, or let's talk about some of the things that you've been successful at. You've gotten a job before. Like, how did you do that? You bought a house. Maybe even if the business failed, that you were talking about, 90 something percent fail in 3 years. Like, at what point, like, how far did you get in there? Like, you started out, you took a risk, you gathered some information, you started the business, you filled out whatever paperwork. There's a lot of success in that process, even though ultimately it may not have panned out. And, that might be important to figure out. But for the next one, you have almost a little model for how you do it again.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's another book I was reading recently called Thinking in Bets. I don't know if you've read that book by Annie Duke. Yeah, she's was actually a professional poker player. And now she's doing more business consulting stuff, but she wrote this book about thinking in bets in terms of how do you make decisions when you don't know what the outcome is going to be? And I think, there's the little successes, as you say, along the way. And let's just say that the business, the outcome maybe at the end of the day was that that particular business didn't work. It quoted, objectively it failed because you could no longer run the business, but there were still wins that happened along the way. Like you said, you were able to acquire this skill, you learned this, you learned that, and that's why you see sometimes it's just like you hear entrepreneurs say, "Well, my first business failed, and then I did this, and I did that, and then finally this one succeeded." So they were building upon things that were working. But but I guess my point there is that sometimes, we don't have control of the outcome. Despite our best efforts, we may get all the things in place, but because there may be external things at work, COVID or whatever happens, right? So we don't always control the outcome. Yeah. So
Yeah, I think I haven't started reading it yet, but I just bought a new book. I'm trying to remember the name of it, but it's about reorienting ourselves to smaller tests
right.
versus the larger goal setting. And the idea that, even if we ultimately are successful, it's probably a really different, it looks very different than what we started out trying to get to. So infrequently do we get to that first vision of the goal. And I think that idea of testing small along the way, and those tests reveal something, not just a framework that you can replicate, but they also reveal new direction that you can take. They create new opportunities, and you think, oh my gosh, well, I didn't even think about that. Again, my friend, as an example, the commercial hummus, idea, not something that he set out to do when he was selling falafel sandwiches, but here he is, and there he is in the grocery stores side by side with some of the larger brands. So it's pretty cool.
How difficult is it though in working? Because there's so much of this is psychology, right? So
Yes.
much of it is mindset. So much of it is seeing you feel these failures, these outcomes that happen. It's just like, man, that was so painful. And getting people to see, okay, here's, the glass half full, or the, the successful part of that. And one of the things that I'll bring up, which this is crazy, I can't believe I'm bringing this up, but I'll bring it up now just because she had brought it up, Andy Duke brought it up in her book, was about the infamous Seattle Seahawks Super Bowl ending. So I'm guessing you're probably a New England Patriots fan, being from Maine.
I am.
Diehard Seahawk fan over here. And so the end of that Super Bowl was like the worst possible thing that could happen. Of course, the best possible outcome if you're a New England Patriot fan. But she brought it up in the book was that, hey, that play was a good play. The outcome wasn't good, but you don't know what the outcome's going to be, right? You take a bet. And that was kind of her point there. It's just like, and even when you're analyzing this, she looked at the statistics in terms of, okay, what kind of play could they run? They could run this. So objectively, it was quote unquote a good play to run, even though the outcome was this was possibly the worst play ever run in the history of football. So, yeah.
Right. I totally agree with the premise, though. The idea that the results do not necessarily mean that the decision was a bad decision, based on all the information that you had at the time. And that's something that I do, I try to be really open with clients about, as well as, even if I'm brought a lot of circumstances, around different subject matter or different businesses in which I am not expert, right? I had someone come to me at one time who wanted to buy a franchise, and I explained that was not something that I had a great deal of experience in, but it's a series of decisions that he had to make, and there are a lot of things that he needed to consider. So my role was to put him in the best possible situation where he could make a decision confidently, and trying to figure out what information we needed to gather, who we needed to talk to, what considerations we needed to have. And based on his very specific, risk tolerance, whatever that might be, what he was really ultimately looking for, So if something didn't work out and it wasn't successful, it wasn't, again, it's not that the decision was bad. I'm just, it's about taking in as much information as you can and trying without getting kind of mired down in that, but to feel confident about the decision, regardless of the outcome. Obviously, we like to be tied to the outcome too, but we hope for the best. But yeah, I think it's a hard thing to separate yourself from because the result is at times devastating, as
Yeah.
I'm sure it was as a Seahawk fan.
Yes, it
Try not to
was.
smile.
I'm still not over it. I guess I'm over it. Um, never be over it. Yeah. So I have a question about your journey and your practice, that just looking, kind of flipping the script a little bit in terms of how you view your journey as an executive coach and an author. And how do you think, how important is it that sort of being public and making these public commitments? Because I see that as being something that I think about when I think about you is, here's Rob, who made a public commitment years ago. He says, I'm going to write a weekly newsletter. And at some point you made that pledge to yourself first, but then you made a public pledge. It's just like, I'm writing a weekly newsletter. You have a public platform you're doing it in, and now it becomes a practice. How much did that, just that little action stack, that little frame, shape your career journey?
Oh, that's a really great question. I think it shaped it tremendously because it was probably one of the first long-term commitments, and I didn't even realize how long I was making it for. Right, I just said weekly newsletter. I had no idea what it would become, whether or not people would even like it, and I just thought weekly was what you did.
Right.
I'm following the advice and path of my business partner at the time. And so committing to that weekly made sense in that context. Now it became something else. It became, a weekly almost relationship. There are people who have been subscribed to that newsletter I've been writing it since 2011, and I've missed 2 weeks in which I've asked a friend to fill in, both for, family emergency stuff. But other than that, I've written every single week, and some are good, some are bad, some are, whatever. But there is a relationship there where I love the replies. I love Thursday morning, where that's when it comes out, and I spend a good deal of time in my inbox, just having conversations, replying to people who are asking questions or making comments about the newsletter. It's a lot of where I test out the material that ends up in the books. I write about certain topics, and I see what resonates, whether it resonates externally or resonates with me. Like that felt really good and powerful, or that I felt like I'm onto something. Uh, and then, yeah, I mean, it's been the source of courses that I've created, the books that I've written. The content from both books has come, in some cases, not, whole cloth, but pieces of newsletters, ideas and concepts that I've rewritten and shared in the books.
So with that in mind, is there something that a business leader can do? Like, what's the number one thing a business leader can do to be a better leader? That's an action stack type habit or ritual or something like that. Is this something that you focus on as part of your coaching? It's just like, okay, there needs to be a touchstone. There needs to be something that they're coming back to just do these tiny experiments, do some kind of, I'm quoting action stack because I took that from your book.
Yeah. So, just to kind of put a finer point on the action stack. So it's simple, repeatable plan, something that you can do over and over. And my action stacks, I use them for various things, but writing a newsletter would be one. You pull it up and then review the topics that I've written about in the last, couple months, make sure I'm not overlapping anything. And And so I go through, it's a little, lack of a better word, kind of a checklist. But regular, if there were one thing that I think, improves a leader is some form of reflection. And that process of taking time away from work to reflect personally so you could journal. So for me, that writing that newsletter, as much as I'm writing outward, I'm working through thoughts that I've had over the course of a week and thinking about new ideas and how I want to put them together. I'm thinking about it from the perspective of what might be helpful for the readers, what might be helpful in my coaching practice, things that I'm thinking through and learning and trying to implement. So it's a reflective tool for me as much as anything. And so I think that process is really important. And whether it's writing, getting a coach, journaling something, I think is, people sort of dismiss it all the time, but and again, I think if you have to be kind of wired to want to write. Like sometimes staring at a blank page is not for everyone, but that an act of reflection with a friend, coach, mentor is really, really important. And I think it has to be very deliberate, not just kind of we all reflect casually as we're driving the highway and listening to the radio or whatnot, but I think a deliberate act of reflection on a regular basis. I hate to prescribe like weekly or, like it has to be regular.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the key is accountability, right? And so that's what you help provide as an executive coach. And in the case of, talking about your newsletter, your accountability was, it's to yourself, but it's also to your readers. So you know that there's that pressure, right? That expectation, and you're holding yourself to this higher standard. And I think there's something to be said for that in general. It's reflection, but it's also somebody that's going to hold us to a higher standard. It's like, hey, here's possible selves of you. Let's focus on the higher self, whatever that might be, and aspire to that.
That the accountability to others has been huge, and I'll tell you, the first time that I realized how powerful that was kind of in a glitch. Like I had my email marketing, scheduled or whatnot. It didn't go out, and I got emails saying, "Are you okay?"
Like the tool didn't fire or whatever.
The tool didn't fire on the time that it normally.
Okay.
Close, excuse me.
Yeah. It's like it's Sunday night. I didn't get my Rob email.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that it was such a humbling thing, but it was really cool. Like, no, people are actually reading this and interested in it.
Yeah.
And I even get people apologizing like, hey, I haven't responded in a long time, but I'm still reading. Just want you to know kind of that it's all, it's very encouraging. And so I'm always blown away by that, but that kind of like cemented that, no, people might actually be getting something and expecting, kind of, and enjoy it as even, a moment of reflection for themselves.
So when you introduced yourself at the beginning of the episode here, you said you're an author first, an executive coach second. And I know that wasn't intentional on your part to do it that way. At what point did you make that shift in your mind? Or has it been that way for as long as you can remember?
It was a shift, and I wanted to start talking about it that way because it's a couple of years after the first book, and I was in the process of writing the second, and I knew I had, the sort of the book deal or whatnot to write to, and feeling like, okay, like, no, this is a real thing. This is what you do. I get to write and think and share ideas and concepts, and then talk with people about those ideas and concepts and help them. It's a pretty cool way to live, get to do that. So
at any point in there, did you have imposter syndrome or this fake it until you make it sort of thing?
Yeah. I mean,
yeah,
I think
I asked that just because this is going to be common amongst executives and leaders, right? Because they're they're building something new. They're stepping into shoes maybe they haven't had before. What they're doing is maybe experimental. So you know, going back to the psychology of coaching and that, what is your relationship with that imposter syndrome?
Well, I have definitely felt it, experienced it, but I want to kind of talk about it a little bit in terms of how you were talking about it in terms of executives experiencing it, right? I think we have these perceptions of what it means to be X or Y. So what it means to be an author, to say that you're an author. And so some part of starting to say that was overcoming that imposter syndrome and saying, no, this is you, there's evidence. You've got a book out and another one on the way. And as soon as the second one, that is the thing that you do. And I have worked with rising executives who are trying to, I think, almost like they're trying to figure out the formula, like they've got their own little chemistry set, and they think that there's this like particular potion that makes an executive, and they're trying to figure out what it is. Like, what do I need to have to be that person? And a lot of times, it's really interesting to hear them once they've achieved that status, realizing there was no secret necessarily, and that they are still as smart as anyone in the room, as capable as anyone in the room. But when the power imbalance is there, when that title is just a little off, you think that there's something that you need to unlock. And it's not that there aren't certain communication styles that you might need to learn or adjust to, certain skills that you might need to gain, but the capability, like it's not, you are capable, I guess, is, the people that are coming to me are capable of that. And they don't often see it because they feel like they're faking it already, let alone as they aspire to that next level and figuring it out. Like, it's still you looking at, we might need to gain new skills, but it's still you looking at the situation, making decisions, solving problems, trying to suss out the best possible, course of action.
Yeah, and I think the key word there is you. It's still you looking at the situation. You, Rob, you, Glenn, you, whoever, as the coach. And this is where it's just so fascinating to me, the psychology part of it. And you probably feel like therapist at times versus coach, because I've gone through this myself as well. It's like you feel that as a leader that you need to imitate what other people have done, right? And so that's, I think, for myself at least, that was part of the imposter syndrome for me. It's just like, I see other people did this, so I'm going to just imitate them, and therefore I will achieve what they achieved because I'm following what they did. And they may have even given me, do this, do that, the other, and packaged it in a cute little acronym or something like that, And what it feels more like, it's more like becoming yourself. That's why I said, what do you bring to it? Because as your example of your friend who was really good at falafels and now hummus, right? Somebody else in that same situation, maybe you give them the exact same ingredients metaphorically or actually, their outcome is not going to be the same because it's not them, right? Is that something that you consciously approach when you're looking at it? It's just like, okay, how do I get this person to see that it's really sort of bringing their authentic selves out? And that's part of, when you say reflection, that's really what that process is doing, right? It's stopping, saying, wait a minute, is this really authentically me, or am I, mimicking some other thing? And not to say you can't take lessons from others, but yeah.
So the example you gave of following the examples of others, I think is, I actually agree that there are things that you can do. You can follow that. The mistake we make is thinking that the outcome is going to be exactly the same, to your point with the friend, right? So those examples, I think, kind of give us these little guardrails. Like we test that. How does that feel to put on that that coat for a little bit, and like that's not quite me. Maybe I'll try this coat over here, right? And you start kind of dialing in a little bit. The what I think a coach does, and what reflection can do as well, is teasing out the past success, teasing out your style, identifying, like, talk to me about, you know, how you approach your work now. And so that what I'm doing is sort of identifying their style and skill sets, and helping them to see them and then apply them to this new situation. And, you know, we don't, you know, for good reason, you know, we don't sit there kind of basking in, all of our past successes. That's not the point. You know, we don't, I don't want people to be, completely, you know, ego driven about it, or get a big head about their success necessarily, but just to restore some of that confidence and feeling like, no, I do know how to solve problems. Like that alone, just that, like, I have solved many, many problems in my life. And actually, through reflection or with coaching, I can help them tease out like a pattern of how they've done it. And then I say, look, you did it here, you did it here, you did it here. Like, there's something there that we can use in this new situation. So now, to your point, it feels more authentic. Like, I have done that. I am capable of that. I mean, I have proof and example, like my books. Like, I have proof and example that I can say I'm an author. I'm not pretending to be one, or faking it. Like, I can say, like, I've done it, and now, and confidently use that as a way to describe who I am or what I do.
I've heard this catchphrase typically amongst younger generation. The Lulu is the Salulu. Have you heard that one?
No, I haven't, but I like it. It sounds like I'm going to like it anyway. It's the first Lulu that got me, that throws me.
Yeah. So delusion is the solution. The Lulu is the Salulu, right?
Okay.
And so, I think going back to maybe our sports icons, inspiration from, and you mentioned in your book too, like Michael Jordan or Kobe, it's like the Mamba mentality. At some point they adopted an alter ego, if you will. It's like that higher self, that they're holding themselves to the standard, they're holding themselves accountable. And, through their coaches and their just vision or whatever, there's just like this alter ego that they're shooting for. And is that something that higher self, whether you put a catchphrase around it or not, like how much is that the focus when you're doing executive coaching?
So I would say probably not a lot. Let's just say that, because I feel like we're discovering what that might be. Where oftentimes with executives the people that I'm working with, it's not that we're not aspiring to a certain thing, but part of it is helping them uncover, maybe, and put together that alter ego or that higher self exists already before we put it out in front of us. That there is a spark, and I think this happens for a lot of entrepreneurs and executives that are, and people who are just driven to create or do. They feel this, it's not, they can't turn it off, right? They just want to feel successful in some way, whatever that definition is. They're striving to achieve something. A lot of times when, certainly I think as people get further on in their career, they might lose that a little bit or feel like they've lost that spark. So it might be re-identifying with it. So that spark, I think, becomes the higher self, or like, what is the drive or the passion, or acknowledging that we don't have to necessarily go back to that version of it, but that the things that drive you now are different. So we can create a new version. So rather than aspiring to your higher self, I'm more kind of trying to uncover that and restore that sense of personal agency that people feel, and feeling in control, so that then they can maybe recover an alter ego or set an alter ego out there. But I also think those are kind of rare cases, like a Kobe, or Mamba mentality. I think sometimes, my daughter happens to play basketball, and as someone who is very supportive of her, there's this desire to kind of want to go, oh yeah, you gotta think like this or have this, this mentality. You should be up every morning. That's not her. That is not what drives her or motivates her. She is like when she plays, she smiles. Like it is you. There's just joy on this girl's face, and she's quite good. So to kind of like make her angry or kind of like gritty, like it's just not going to fit for her. It's not a great example. So she's figuring out the things that motivate her and trying to uncover that. And a lot of it's based on just tapping into her joy and her love and desire to be, better. But it's not, the mama mentality wouldn't fit for her.
Sure, sure. Yeah. I guess it doesn't necessarily have to be mama mentality, but just whatever the alter ego is. I guess, have you noticed any generational things in terms of how you coach, somebody that's maybe, we'll say of our age, versus the younger generations?
I don't have a ton of experience with younger, maybe a generation just before me, but I've had a few clients. I do think that there are some differences. I don't know that I'm ready to or sort of articulate those differences yet, but I'm just noticing a difference in a seriousness or an understanding of how to navigate, things or that. But this person is not someone who, that I'm kind of thinking of, is not someone who came to me seeking coaching. So that's a different kind of relationship. But everyone who comes to me, even I had someone come to me in their early 20s and they had that drive and mentality. I'm still working with them and we've been working together for, gosh, it's almost been 10 years. And off and on, different phases, different points, he'll come back and we kind of dig into a new challenge together. And he just sort of has a little kind of an old soul, I guess, is and eager and curious. So I can't speak to generational differences so much, but I do frequently caution people around those generational differences or being too quick to judge, because I have young kids or kids who are just entering the workforce. I have 3 kids just entering the workforce, and it's like I see how hard they work. Their style might be a little different. The way they approach it might be a little different, but I definitely see, they're showing up, they're doing the work. There's nothing that you would want to openly dismiss it, generationally about them. And they're thoughtful. So I don't know. I'm cautious about that.
So if I were to go to Rob Hatch University, we kind of answered this question already, but so typically we go to universities and we're going to get a Bachelor of Arts or a Bachelor of Science, depending on what our field is. So if I were to study at Rob Hatch University, what would my degree in? Would it be in arts or sciences?
Oh, I think it would definitely be, well, let's call it you mentioned psychology a lot. And so I think a lot of this, so whether or not you put psychology into the scientific, bucket or not, but that I think that it's more about understanding others and the self, decision making, drive, motivation, really how you think and approach problems yourself. Or I mentioned earlier about restoring that sense of personal agency, that there's this point when you start to stop immediately reacting to something, even if it's not noticeable, but where you pause, reflect almost instantaneously, and then choose to act. I think there's that lovely space where if you can start to identify that more and kind of you feel more in control, you feel more confident, you make better decisions that are rooted in your values, who you are, your strengths. So I think that those are the things that you would walk away with. Is I'm not going to say a degree in psychology, but better understanding of yourself as you and the power that you have to take action in the world.
It feels like more of an arts thing, but psychology is what you're applying, which is both an art and a science. But yeah, again, I thought it was interesting just because I typically approach things more scientifically, just like, okay, we're going to test this as a quote unquote experiment and see what the outcome is. Okay, now we have data. Well, we have enough data, we can make the quote unquote right decision about things. But at the end of the day, I think ultimately, for me, it's about, just sort of self-discovery and becoming. And at the end, it's like, oh, I have this body of work to show for things. Hey, that was kind of like my masterpiece that I painted,
Right.
So it was an art project at the end. So
Well, I think,
yeah.
I love the way that you're talking about approaching a problem. There's certainly nothing wrong with gathering that data. Like that that's what's providing you with the confidence to make the decision, right? It's just your approach to gathering information and assessing it. And it served you well. And, we could point to lots of examples of how well it served you. It's not that you got every decision right, but, here you are.
Yeah. Here I am,
so,
despite myself. Yes. Despite all those things. Yeah.
And I think in working with someone who has that approach, then I'm leaning into that with them. And I'm trying to tease out and understand, like, okay, so that's how that works for you. So let's lean into that and really embrace it, rather than trying to convince someone that my way of approaching things is better. I'm always going to shift to the, client's approach and what's worked for them in the past. Like I want to understand that and then leverage it.
So one final question before we go. What's the next book that Rob Hatch is working on conceptually?
Oh, I think it's going to be another sort of maybe a broader take or a different take on the success frames idea. I think there's more to talk about in terms of learning from our success and plumbing sort of the depths of that. That's one. I'm also somewhere in there's so much information right now in the field of neuroscience, neuropsychology. And if you listen to the advice that's being given from these studies, and when the scientist is interviewed and they are asked the question, so what practical advice would you give? There's a lot of the same pieces of advice exist. Reflection is one of those things that people should take time to sort of think before they speak or think before they act. Or there's so many aligning things, regardless of what the study is trying to discover. The eventual advice, I think, is quite similar. And so that's got me really excited, honestly, right now, to think about what is sort of how do we coalesce the best advice out there and sort of figure out what it looks like for us.
Awesome. Yeah, I love it. Looking forward to it. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much, Rob, for joining me. This has been such a pleasure. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for inviting me on.
All right. Thank you so much for tuning in to Data and Confused. I really appreciate you listening. Please go ahead and subscribe as I get this podcast off the ground. I have a lot of amazing guests planned, industry experts and thought leaders from the tech and cybersecurity world. So look forward to seeing you in future episodes. Thank you.